This one isn't so much about what the women were told, it's about what the disciples actually did. Did the disciples stay in Jerusalem, or do they actually go to Galilee?
Did the disciples ever leave Jerusalem? Or did they never leave, or did they leave and go to Galilee? Depends which gospel you read.
Luke chapter 24, verse 49 to 52. Behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you. This is Jesus talking. But tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you are endued with power from on high. And he led them out as far as Bethany, and he lifted up his hands and blessed them. Now it came to pass, while he blessed them, that he was parted from them and carried up into heaven, and they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy. So Luke is just recording that they were in Jerusalem. He was talking to them in Jerusalem, visited and appeared to them in Jerusalem, and then he ascended to heaven and they went back to Jerusalem. Acts chapter 1, verse 4, also written by Luke, says, being assembled together with them, he commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise of the Father, which he said, you have heard from me. So Luke and Acts, here's the part, it's kind of implied though. Luke and Acts make no mention at all of the disciples going to Galilee. Don't mention it. Everything that Luke records, whether it's at the end of his gospel or the beginning of Acts, everything that Luke records has them in Jerusalem. He doesn't mention any trips to Galilee. Matthew 28:16, then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had appointed for them. Mark does not say where the appearances happened. However, back in chapter 16, verse 7, they're told to go to Galilee, so you can kind of assume that's what they did, even though it's not specifically mentioned. John 21, verse 1 says, after these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, which is another name for the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so according to Matthew and John, and reasonably Mark too, they went to Galilee. But Luke says they didn't. Does Luke really say they didn't? Is that what Luke says? They have no mention of the appearances in Galilee. Does that mean they never went to Galilee? No. Just because he doesn't mention it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. The other three Gospels actually mention it. That's a pretty good indication that it happened. And for whatever reason, Luke doesn't mention it. We've talked before about how the ending of Luke kind of seems abbreviated. I mean, he's giving a ton of detail. And then the last couple chapters just seem really rushed. And he just like crams a bunch of stuff in. Maybe he's running out of space. Maybe he's running out of time. I mean, I don't know. But just because he doesn't mention it doesn't mean it didn't happen. The other three Gospels tell us it did. There's no contradiction there. And again, this is one of those things where it's an oddity that these kind of things, all of the ones that we have dealt with through this series are things that high-ranking, high, credible, prestigious Bible scholars who are, atheist, skeptical Bible scholars will point out and go, aha, contradiction in the Bible. And people continue to just lap it up, despite the fact that it is easily shown to be wrong, but these guys don't lose their credibility. I mean, we have looked at, I think this is 22, 23 different contradictions. And 12 of them, I believe, were from Bart Ehrman. How many times does he have to get something wrong before you start going, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I shouldn't listen to this guy. But does he lose credibility among skeptics? No, he does not. Whereas, if you had a preacher, if you had a Christian guy, who made some mistakes, every mistake they made is going to be a discrediting offense in the eyes of non-believers. You can kind of see a little double standard going on. No, he he grew up, he was raised in church, he grew up evangelical. I think he actually, I don't know if he was studying to be a minister, but he went to Bible college. He was studying the Bible, and then he had a teacher that pointed out an issue, an error, a discrepancy, a difference or something. And that just kind of sent him down a spiral of, oh no, these things are wrong. And I believe the one that got him was actually one of the ones we've already looked at and saw that it was nothing. But he would call himself an agnostic. But he's written several books specifically against and opposing the Bible. But what's interesting is he'll say things that lead you, like imply, well, you can't trust the Bible. Oh, well, we don't know what was written. Right? He'll compare it to the telephone game. Right? We all know that game where you whisper something to the next person and it goes around down the line, around the circle, and by the time it gets to the end, it's nothing like the beginning. I've actually seen him in debates refer to the transmission of the Bible, copying of the Bible, to the telephone game. He knows better. This is exactly his field of study. He knows that's not true. And I've seen him in interviews in different places where you kind of get him cornered, and he admits, yeah, the Bible we have now is pretty much what was written down originally. Well, he knows it. For some reason, I don't know if it is just his eyes are blinded, if he's got some kind of emotional, personal beef, or just whatever. It sells books. I mean, I don't want to accuse people of that, but I don't know. It's just, I'm trying to remember what it was, because he actually studied with a guy named Bruce Metzger, who was one of the top Bible scholars of the last century. And they co-authored a book together. Or at least he worked on like an updated edition of it or whatever. Well, he did that book, and the very same year he released a popular book, right? This one was a scholarly book that, academic people buy, it costs like $200 kind of thing. One of those kind of books. But then in the popular book that gets sold in bookstores that the average person is buying, he contradicted. So in this book, he says one thing, in the popular book, he says another. I don't want to assign motives or, say bad things. I just let the facts stand for themselves, that the claims he makes against the Bible do not stand, as we have seen.